I was halfway through finalizing the biggest deal of my career when I heard the laugh. Not just any laugh, her laugh, the one I'd memorized over 8 years of marriage. But it wasn't coming from our home or from a phone call with me. It was coming from the next booth in a downtown steakhouse, soft at first, then sharper, paired with a man's voice I knew too well. Charlie, my oldest friend, my business partner. I froze, pen still hovering over a contract worth 7 figures. My client's words blurred into background noise. Through the gap in the divider, I caught fragments, her saying, "He has no idea." Him replying, "After this deal goes through, he won't matter anymore." The air in my chest turned heavy. My mind tried to reason it away. Maybe it was about something else, maybe I misheard. But then her hand slid over his, their fingers locking like it was the most natural thing in the world. I left without signing, without saying goodbye. My assistant texted asking if I'd closed. I told her I needed to push it to tomorrow. She didn't ask why. On the drive home, every mile felt like a question I didn't want answered. How long? How deep? Was it just personal, or was my business on the table too? That night, I didn't confront her. I watched. She came home late, smelling faintly of his cologne. When I asked about her day, she gave me a 2-sentence story and a quick kiss before heading to the shower. The next morning, I checked the company server. 2 files were missing, the pitch deck for our next round of investors and a confidential client list. I searched the backup. Gone there too. Only Charlie and I had access, and her. I sent Charlie a casual text. "Need to talk numbers before tomorrow's call." He replied almost instantly, "Busy, let's connect next week." That wasn't how Charlie worked. We never delayed investor prep, unless he didn't plan on me being there at all. By noon, I had an email from the client whose deal I'd paused. They'd decided to go another direction. No explanation, just polite dismissal. I knew then this wasn't a random affair. It was a move, a takeover. I spent the next 3 days in controlled silence. I showed up to the office, smiled in meetings, pretended not to notice the way people avoided eye contact. When I walked into the conference room on Thursday, the CFO looked like she'd seen a ghost. Charlie sat at the head of the table, my wife beside him, both with folders in front of them. "We're restructuring," he began, as if he was announcing a weather update. "You'll get a generous exit package. This is just business." I wanted to slam the table, call them out in front of everyone, demand the truth. But something in me shifted. If I exploded now, I'd give them exactly what they wanted. The image of me as emotional, unstable, unfit to lead. So I smiled, took the folder, walked out. In the parking lot, I called a lawyer, not to sue yet, not until I had more than suspicion, but I needed protection, and I needed proof. That night, while she was asleep, I pulled the hard drive from her laptop and cloned it. By morning, I was staring at months of emails, coded language about moving forward without baggage, meeting invites to private dinners with my biggest clients, and a spreadsheet that made my stomach turn. They hadn't just planned to take the company, they were moving assets, preparing to freeze me out financially before I even realized I was locked out. I saved every file, every date, every name. The funny thing about betrayal, once you see it for what it is, you stop bleeding and start sharpening. They thought I'd go quietly. They thought I'd lick my wounds and disappear. They were wrong. The morning after I cloned her hard drive, I skipped the office. No calls, no emails. If they wanted me invisible, I'd let them think they'd succeeded. It bought me time. I drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over and opened my laptop. The files were worse than I thought. They weren't just plotting to take the company. They'd already signed preliminary agreements with 2 of my top clients, offering discounted rates in exchange for leaving me out entirely. My wife was listed as a silent equity partner in Charlie's new venture. Silent, maybe, but her fingerprints were everywhere. I didn't have the power to stop them yet, but I could make it expensive. The first step was information control. I contacted every supplier we worked with and requested copies of contracts for my personal records. I said nothing about changes. I just wanted my own paper trail before they doctored anything. Next, I called an old college friend, Matt. He ran a small but relentless PR firm. I told him I might have a story worth his time, but I wasn't ready to release it. He agreed to keep it quiet until I gave the word. By midweek, Charlie sent me a friendly email asking to meet for lunch. I agreed. We sat at an outdoor table. He spoke like nothing had happened. All smiles, empty small talk, even a toast to new beginnings. I let him run his mouth, every word confirming what I already knew. He thought I was finished. When the check came, I excused myself to take a call. In reality, I was meeting a courier out back to hand over an encrypted drive with all the stolen files. It was heading straight to my lawyer. That night, she confronted me. "Charlie says you're being distant. Are you okay?" Her voice carried that fake concern I'd heard before, the kind people use when they already know the answer. I told her I was just tired. I didn't accuse, not yet. The next day, I made my move. Quietly, I met with our largest client, the one they hadn't approached yet. I laid out the situation, showed them proof, and offered a direct partnership with me. No middleman, no Charlie. They agreed on the condition that I could guarantee continuity. I promised I could. 2 days later, my lawyer filed for an injunction to freeze certain company accounts, citing potential misappropriation of intellectual property. It didn't shut the business down, but it sent a shockwave through our network. Suddenly, Charlie couldn't move money without court oversight. The look on his face when he called me was the first real crack I'd seen. "You blindsided me," he said, voice tight. I kept mine calm. "No, Charlie, you blindsided yourself." Meanwhile, I began pulling my personal finances out of any joint accounts with my wife. I rerouted income, transferred investments, and placed key assets in a trust she couldn't touch. The breaking point came the following Monday. I walked into the office unannounced, carrying a box. Inside were printouts of every email, contract draft, and spreadsheet from their scheme. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply placed the box on the conference table during the weekly staff meeting, looked at each person in the room, and said, "If you're wondering what's been going on, this is it. Read it for yourselves." Then I walked out. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. Within hours, I had messages from employees saying they were resigning, that they'd had suspicions but never proof. By evening, Charlie's assistant emailed me a copy of his resignation letter. She was still at the house when I got home. "What did you do?" she demanded, panic replacing her usual composure. I didn't answer. I dropped a manila envelope on the kitchen counter. Divorce papers, drafted and ready. Her face didn't break. It hardened. "You'll regret this," she said. Maybe, but regret wasn't my goal. My goal was truth. And the first strike had landed. The morning after I served her divorce papers, the silence was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She didn't speak to me over breakfast, just stared at her phone like it might give her a way out. By noon, my lawyer called. The injunction had done its job. A forensic audit was underway, and the preliminary findings were ugly for Charlie. Transfers from company accounts to his new venture, consulting fees paid to my wife, intellectual property filed under his name. The kind of paper trail that turns ambition into a criminal case. That same afternoon, I met with the board. Officially, I was still a co-founder. Unofficially, they'd been preparing to push me out. But now they had to face a stack of evidence thick enough to bury any trust they'd had in Charlie. By the end of the meeting, they voted to suspend him pending the investigation. 2 days later, the first article went live. Matt's PR team had been patient until now, but once the audit findings hit the public record, it was open season. The headline was simple: "Local entrepreneur faces fraud probe after business partner's allegations." My name wasn't in the title, but it didn't need to be. The story made sure the difference between victim and perpetrator was crystal clear. Charlie called that night. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a mess of excuses, half apologies, and veiled threats about dragging me down with him. I deleted it. The divorce moved quickly. My wife's lawyer tried to negotiate for a fair split, but the evidence of her financial involvement made her position weak. She walked away with far less than she'd expected. I walked away with my company shares intact, a new client base, and no more illusions about loyalty. The final blow wasn't mine. It came from the people they'd underestimated. One of the clients Charlie poached filed a lawsuit after realizing he'd breached their exclusivity clause. Another supplier cut ties entirely. The new venture folded before it even launched. By spring, the audit had concluded. The report was forwarded to state regulators, and Charlie's license to operate in our sector was suspended. My wife moved 3 states away. Last I heard, she was working in a job that barely covered rent. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the absence of the people who tried to burn you down. 6 months later, I signed a deal with an international partner, the same deal Charlie had once said we'd never land. When the contract was finalized, I took a walk by the lake near my new office. I pulled a coin from my pocket, one I'd kept since the day I left that steakhouse without signing my biggest deal. Back then, it had felt like the end of everything. I flicked it into the water and watched the ripples spread. Not because I needed closure, but because I already had it. They had gambled everything on my silence, and they lost. Winning doesn't mean life goes back to the way it was. It means you start from zero without the people who tried to bury you. Months after the fallout, my days were quieter, but not idle. I rebuilt the business with a smaller, tighter team. Every hire went through me personally. I wasn't looking for resumes padded with buzzwords. I wanted people who understood what loyalty actually looked like. The first few weeks, I still caught myself glancing at the empty desk where Charlie used to sit, wondering how I missed the signs. But the truth is, when you're building something, you want to believe the people beside you are pulling in the same direction. That belief had nearly cost me everything. One morning, I got an email from a former employee who had left during the chaos. She apologized for not speaking up sooner, said she'd noticed odd behavior from Charlie and my wife, but didn't want to get caught in the middle. I didn't blame her. Fear has a way of making people freeze. But it also reminded me of something I'd been avoiding. I hadn't just been a victim, I'd been a blind spot in my own company. So I changed how I operated. Meetings were more transparent, contracts were double-checked by multiple people, and I stopped giving anyone, including myself, unchecked control over sensitive accounts. Financially, I recovered faster than I expected. The partnership I'd signed in the spring brought in steady revenue, and a few clients Charlie had stolen came back once they saw he was gone. Still, the real payoff wasn't money. It was watching my company's name rebuild in the market, not through ads or PR, but through the quiet endorsement of satisfied clients. As for Charlie, the last I heard, the fraud case had gone to mediation. He avoided prison but walked away with crushing debt and no license to work in the industry. My ex-wife didn't fare much better. Her silent partner income had dried up, and the settlement left her with just enough to get by. Neither of them reached out again. I didn't waste time following their lives. People like that feed on your attention. Cutting them off entirely was part of the win. One evening, Matt called. "You know, you could make this whole story public," he said. "Name names, burn whatever's left of them." I thought about it. It would have been easy. One statement, a few interviews, and they'd never show their faces in the industry again. But I didn't need that. They'd already lost more than my words could take. Instead, I decided on something else. I set up a small fund for entrepreneurs who'd been pushed out of their own companies by partners they trusted. No press releases, no charity galas, just direct help to people fighting the same kind of quiet betrayal I had. The first person I funded was a young guy from Denver whose co-founder had locked him out of their shared accounts. He called me a week later, voice shaking with relief. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You don't owe me," I told him. "Just don't let them see you coming next time." It was strange. I'd started this fight thinking revenge was about taking something back. But standing there, phone in hand, I realized it was more about making sure the damage stopped with me. 1 year to the day after I walked out of that steakhouse, I signed another major deal, bigger than the one I'd lost. I didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. I just took the signed contract, put it in my desk, and went back to work. Because that's the real ending no one tells you about. Revenge isn't the moment they fall. It's the life you build after, the one they can't touch. It's strange how quickly the past stops knocking once you stop answering the door. 1.5 years after everything collapsed, I barely thought about Charlie or my ex-wife. Not because I'd forgiven them, I hadn't. But they no longer had a seat in my life, and that was the point. The company was thriving. The fund I'd started had helped 6 other business owners recover from betrayals that would have ended their careers. Each time I wired the money or connected them with the right lawyer, I saw a little more clearly why I'd gone through what I did. There's no guarantee life will spare you from people like that, but you can make sure they don't get to keep the power. Then, one afternoon, the past called again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. It was a journalist working on a piece about corporate fraud and asking for my comment. She mentioned Charlie's name. He'd resurfaced in another city under a different company name, but old habits had followed him. A former associate had tipped off the press. She wanted me to go on record. My first instinct was to decline. I'd already won. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that silence is what lets people like him start over without consequences. So I told her everything I could without violating my legal agreements. The patterns, the manipulation, the way he used personal relationships to mask professional theft. I kept it factual, no embellishment. She thanked me, said it filled a gap in the story. When the article came out 2 weeks later, it spread fast. Not because of my quotes, but because Charlie's new investors pulled out overnight. His latest project folded before launch. This time, it wasn't me taking him down. It was his own reputation finally catching up. Around the same time, I heard from a mutual acquaintance about my ex-wife. She'd tried to start a consulting business, but it never took off. Clients complained she overpromised and underdelivered. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night, I walked down to the same lake where I'd thrown the coin months before. The water was still. I pulled another coin from my pocket, not as a symbol of luck or closure, but as a reminder. You can't stop betrayal from happening, but you can decide how it ends. I tossed it in and stood there until the ripples disappeared. The next morning, I closed on a deal that expanded the company into 3 new states. It wasn't about proving anything to them anymore. It was about building something that would last because I learned the hard way who not to trust. People sometimes ask me if I'd do it all again, knowing the cost. I tell them yes, not because I enjoyed it, but because it taught me the one truth that matters in business and in life. The real revenge isn't making them lose. It's making sure they never get the chance to take from you again. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a win they'll never touch. Peace didn't last. It never does when someone like Charlie thinks there's still a door left to pry open. The notice arrived on a Tuesday. Subpoena for a civil hearing tied to the mediation I thought was finished. A new claim, defamation and tortious interference. In plain English, he was blaming me for the consequences of his own decisions. My lawyer said not to worry. I didn't, but I also didn't underestimate him. Cornered people invent angles. 2 days later, he tried one. An email from a burner address. "Meet me. We can end this quietly." Attached was a draft NDA and a settlement offer. If I signed, I'd agree not to talk to press or regulators again. He'd retract the lawsuit and wire a number big enough to tempt anyone who hadn't already paid for the lesson. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer and the court. Let the record show who was still playing games. At the hearing, his lawyer went first. He tried to paint me as bitter and vindictive, a founder who couldn't handle competition. When it was my turn, I kept it simple: dates, files, transfers, and the order of events, no speeches. The judge asked 3 questions. Each answer pointed back to the documents already in evidence. Facts have a way of clearing smoke. Outside the courthouse, he was waiting near the steps, hands in his pockets like we were about to grab coffee after class. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I already did," I said. He stared at me like if he held eye contact long enough the past might rewrite itself. It didn't. I walked away. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Case dismissed with prejudice. Sanctions for wasting the court's time. The order referenced the audit, the email trail, and his settlement attempt. He'd tried to shift blame. The court didn't buy it. That should have been the end. Then a different call came in, one from an associate at a firm I respected. They'd taken on a client who used to work for Charlie. She said he was trying to start again under a shell company using another person's name as cover. Same patterns, same shortcuts. The associate asked if I'd talk to their client about what to expect if they went public. We met in a quiet conference room with a glass wall that looked out on an empty hallway. He was young, nervous, holding a folder like a shield. He didn't want revenge. He wanted out without losing everything. I told him what I wish someone had told me sooner. Don't warn the person who's hurting you. Warn the people they're about to hurt. Document first. Move your accounts. Protect your access. Then speak once, clearly on the record. He nodded, eyes steadying. "What if I'm wrong?" he asked. "Then the paper trail will say so," I said. "But if you're right, the paper trail is your lifeline." He filed. Regulators moved faster this time. Maybe the industry remembered my case. Maybe the pattern was obvious. Either way, the shell company stalled before it could sign clients. The young associate kept his job and his reputation. Around then, an invitation landed on my desk. Keynote at a founders summit. Topic: ethics after failure. I almost declined. I didn't see myself as a lecturer. Then I thought about the questions I kept getting in private emails at midnight. How do I tell the board? How do I leave without them taking everything? How do I know I'm not overreacting? Saying yes wasn't about a stage. It was about answering once for 1,000 people instead of one at a time. On the day, I spoke without slides. I told the story in the same order it happened, what I missed, where I hesitated, what I'd do differently. I didn't name my ex or Charlie. I didn't need to. The room didn't want villains. It wanted instructions. I gave them 5: share access, audit often, separate personal from company finances, never ignore small discrepancies, and when you uncover a pattern, act before fear convinces you to wait. Afterward, a line formed. Some thanked me, some cried. One man, older than me, said, "I thought I was the only idiot." I told him he wasn't an idiot. He was a builder. Builders believe that strength needs a guardrail, not a tombstone. On my way out, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo of a closed office door with a paper sign. Under investigation, do not enter. I didn't know whose door it was. It didn't matter. Someone else had decided they were done being quiet. That night, I looked over the latest reports from the fund. 2 more founders supported, 1 injunction granted. 1 settlement reached without anyone losing their company. No headlines, no victory laps, just lives not ruined. People ask if revenge feels as good as they imagine. It doesn't. Relief does. Control does. Waking up and knowing the worst people in your story no longer decide anything for you, that's the win. The next morning, I signed off on a policy we'd drafted months earlier. Mandatory cross-checks on any vendor changes, 2 approvals required, monthly audits logged to an external vault. My team groaned at the extra steps. I told them I'd pay the time tax gladly. They laughed, but they got it. Before I left the office, I opened an old email thread, the one from the day I first heard that laugh in the restaurant. I archived it for good, not to erase history, to stop letting it steer. Betrayal tried to write my ending. It didn't. I did. And if anyone tries to test that again, I won't need anger or speeches. I'll need the same thing that saved me the first time: receipts, patience, and a plan that leaves them nowhere to stand.